Three, two, one.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of GrokTALK, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GrokTALK.com. We are your feared, extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GrokTALK.com.
GrokTALK.
We are your fire-breathing, hard-charging, gun-toting, outspoken, rabble-rousing, freedom-loving conservatives and libertarians. Thanks to Mike Ferris for joining us on the show. A lot of great pull quotes in that interview. I can't wait to get into it and listen to it again. Again, Dan Hines came in to talk to us about religious liberty earlier in the program, and of course Max Abramson joined us. It's always great to have Max here. He has tons to contribute, and we're going to move forward now. Our next guest is Lawrence McQuillan. He is a senior fellow and director of the Center of Entrepreneurial Innovation at the Independent Institute. Received his PhD in economics from George Mason University, served as chief economist at the Illinois Policy Institute, director of business and economic studies at the Pacific Research Institute. He's written a book called California Dreaming: Lessons in How to Resolve America's Public Pension Crisis. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, good morning. Great to be with you.
Great to have you on. So, this is a great topic. We've had a couple of different folks on to talk about this. I can't remember who was on last. We were talking about pensions like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's a huge problem. I think in Illinois we were talking about.
Wasn't it one of the AFP folks?
It was somebody from AFP, yes,
yeah.
And I can't remember who it was. But you've written this great book, and so I mean, I obviously it needed to be written. Why did you decide to do it?
Well, it's kind of a national financial crisis that's facing, almost every state has an unfunded public pension debt, and being an economist, I like anything financial, and it's a rising issue across the country, and particularly in California, where I live and where the institute is. Right now, we have a $750 billion. That's with a B. $750 billion unfunded public pension debt just for California alone. Nationwide, it's $4.7 trillion. So, I mean, it's a huge crisis, and I think, not a lot of people are aware of the extent of it and what kind of impact it's having on local governments, local communities. So, I think it's an ideal topic for a book, and this book is kind of a primer. If you don't know a whole lot about it, you can pick it up and read it rather quickly, and it'll kind of give you everything you need to know to get caught up on the issue.
So let's. How did this start? I mean, I know, but maybe our listeners aren't familiar. This has been going on obviously for decades, and we've reached a tipping point. Clearly, you haven't in California. We certainly have a similar problem in New Hampshire, where we have, is it a $2 or $4 billion?
It's anywhere from 4 to 14 billion.
I got to find what headset you're on. Sorry, Max. Go ahead.
It's somewhere between 4 and 14 billion, depending on who you talk to.
Right. So, how did this begin?
Well, actually, the story is quite similar across states. I mean, what happened is for decades, politicians increased pension benefits primarily to buy votes and campaign contributions. They knew people would vote for them if they increased the pension benefits, and at the same time, though, they lowballed the contributions year after year. They weren't putting enough money into the pension fund so that ultimately there would be enough money in the pot 20, 30, 40 years down the road when people started retiring. And it was an easy process to do for politicians because they knew the bill would come due, 20, 30, 40 years out. They'd probably be long gone out of office, which is generally the case. It's certainly the case in California. And yet they could promise the moon today, knowing that they'd be long gone when the costs were due. So it's it's the perfect recipe for just political manipulation, and that's exactly what happened. Legislators just faced perverse incentives to mismanage these funds, and that's the way it was across the country. And of course, if they lowballed the contributions, it freed up money they could use for other programs, and they could buy votes and campaign contributions with that money, using it for other ways. And So they played this game for decades, and now the bill has come due, and taxpayers are now on the hook to make up the difference because the money's just not there.
Now, this is Skip Murphy. Thanks for coming on the show. Certainly, I've been watching this in Illinois and especially in California. I've just been waiting with dread about a federal bailout. Yeah, federal bailout from a federal government that owes over $18 trillion now with unfunded, in the hundreds of trillions. But you look at the cities and the towns in California especially, and Chicago right now, whose unfunded pension liabilities have basically said we can pay the pensions, which that's what the court seemed to be telling them to do, and now there are no services in a lot of these towns and cities. We see the same thing happening in Rhode Island. And how long do you think this is going to come to fruition as to the point of we just can't pay and we're going to take people's homes because they don't pay enough in taxes to be able to sell them off to be able to pay these liabilities? I mean, this whole thing is a mess, but for the individual citizen living in cities where this mayhem that you just described happens, what's going to be the end point?
Well, the end point, it's already been reached in some parts of, especially in California, where we've seen 3 cities already go bankrupt largely over unaffordable pension costs. Vallejo was first, and then Stockton, California, and then more recently San Bernardino. So I think people out here in California especially are very aware of what can happen, what has happened, and keep in mind, like you said, well before bankruptcy, well before insolvency, what happens is that politicians divert money out of other accounts into the pension fund to try to make it work. And so that's what they've been doing out here in California, taking money out of police and fire, schools, libraries, roads, poor government services that, especially in a blue state like California, people like and they expect to be there. Right? When you pick up the phone and dial 911, you want the police to show up. But they've been taking money out of that. We've seen a huge depletion of the police force in Oakland and San Jose, largely because that money has been going to pay for very generous pension benefits. Oakland, for example, they cut their police force by 80 police because they needed the money for the pensions, and a few days later they announced they would no longer respond to 44 different crimes. So I think, when you reach that point where you're sacrificing public safety for pension costs, I think that's the tipping point. And out here, I think people get it. A recent survey of likely voters showed that 85% of likely voters in California see pension costs as either a problem or a big problem. So I think voters out here are way ahead of the legislators because they've lived this and they've seen the schools crumble and the police not show up and fire services cut, fire stations closed in Stockton, for example. So I think the public gets it. It's just a matter of getting a significant reform measure before the public, and I think they would vote for it.
Yeah, I think so. The people voted with their feet in Detroit because it became untenable as a place to live, and they first of all derided white flight, leaving the blacks to suffer. In fact, anybody who could afford to get out did, including any black families who had managed to make it up the ladder before the rungs were cut off. Leaving the city in complete disarray and decay, and Chicago's going the same way. But what I was going to say about your comment on the pensions and the cutting of the Oakland police, any betting that those living on the pensions that are being paid are not living within the city limits where they would be subject to that reduced protection? In other words, they're living somewhere out in the suburbs, up the slopes of Mount Diablo or something, and nowhere near the danger that their pensions are exposing the others to.
Yeah, you're right. And a lot of the pensioners are outside the state of California. In fact, there was recently a map that shows where all the CalPERS, which is the California Public Employees Retirement System, the biggest public pension program in the United States. And it showed a map, and so many of the retirees have left California, and the money just leaves the state then, of course, too. So, and you mentioned Detroit. I mean, that's a classic example of what can go wrong. Not only don't you have enough money for paying pensions, but you end up not having enough money to even keep the streetlights on. And
Exactly.
that's exactly what happened. And then ultimately, what they did in bankruptcy is they reduced pension benefits for current retirees. So they actually ended up cutting checks for pensions for current retirees in Detroit. And I think, that's exactly why I think either current public employees that are retired or soon to be retired should support the reforms that I talk about in my book, because it would guarantee that at least they would get paid for what they've earned. And we wouldn't have to go this route that they did in Detroit, which is actually reducing pension checks for retired people who are counting on that money being there.
Lawrence, this is Skip again. Now, a couple moments ago, you mentioned one of my not my infamous, but one of those phrases I really hate to have to bring up, but the blue social model, which you've aptly described, in a sort of a roundabout way. And I think it would be good for our listeners if you actually described what that model is, although we have lots of examples because that's what we're talking about. But do you think those, along with the description, do you think those cities and states are going to recognize the error of their ways and go back to, do the opposite of what they've been doing? Or are they going to continue to act like Greece?
Well, I mean, in some cases they won't have any alternative because, at the local government level, you face some pretty tight constraints. So you can't get away with the shenanigans that they can at the state and certainly the federal government level. But yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is a very small group of people, public employees in states. In California, only 11% of the population is eligible for a public employee pension. So it's a very small percentage of the population that's causing a huge impact on budgets at the state and local level in California. And they're devouring an ever greater percentage of the budget. For example, the bottom line is that pension costs are increasing 4 times the rate of tax revenue in California at the local government level. So just do the math, and anything that's increasing 4 times the base is eventually going to devour the base. And that's what we're seeing. Larger and larger percentage of the budgets are going to pensions, leaving less and less for other services. And in a blue state, people like their government services, especially the core essential ones, and that's unfortunately, where most of the cuts have been happening in police and fire, because that's where the bigger salaries are and where the biggest pension benefits tend to be as well. So yeah, we've seen this situation grow over time where excessive benefit increases for pensions have ultimately led now to fewer and fewer government services. And this certainly gets the attention of Democrats and people who typically would be favorable towards government are seeing now this particular sector of government as being a huge burden and a huge drag on what they kind of see as the quality of life that they'd like to have for their states or local communities going forward. And the primary funding for my book came from San Francisco Democrats. So, people get it now. People are seeing firsthand the long-term effects. And I think Detroit and, the 3 bankruptcies in California certainly got people's attention, and they're seeing that for the ultimate nightmare it could end up in, and it could go this way even still. Richard Riordan, the former mayor of Los Angeles, said that L.A. could go bankrupt in the next couple of years because of unaffordable pension costs. So we're not out of the woods, but there are proposals now being floated for the ballot in 2016 that would have at least move in the right direction of fixing this problem.
Lawrence, we're going to take a really, really short break. Stay on the line. We will be right back.
Hi, Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning. The the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at gerardatlarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Rock Talk.
All right, we are GrokTALK. Thank you for tuning into the live stream, to Ustream, to YouTube, to iHeart, to TuneIn, to Spreaker, to Stitcher. All those great places. Check out our page at patreon.com, patreon.com/GrokTALK. Make a donation and a regular donation to support the program. Software upgrades, equipment. We don't pay ourselves. It's all about keeping the show on the air. And part of keeping that show on the air is having guests like the gentleman we are currently speaking to, Lawrence McQuillan, talking about pensions and the downward spiral into bankruptcy. And Max, who's a state rep, had a question for you, sir. Hang on, let me turn his microphone on.
The drunk driving cop who I defeated in November for my position as state representative, after he smashed into a parked Kia and destroyed it, hit it so hard that he rammed it into a parked pickup truck and sent both drivers to the hospital with injuries. He threw his badge on the seat and walked away from the crime scene. And instead of getting any jail time, he was forced into early retirement. But he gets to draw a $6,000 a month pension for life, plus the Cadillac medical plan, plus full dental, job training, college, everything. People hear about this kind of thing, and they're saying, well, who's paying for it? And ultimately, it's the taxpayer pays for it. I think, what was the figure a couple of years ago?
Hang on, Lawrence, can you hear us? I think we've somehow lost a connection. Hold on a second.
Hello?
Are you there?
Yeah.
Can you hear us? He can't hear us. What happened?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. We have a technical problem. Skip's going to work on it. Yeah, we can hear the guest, but he can't hear us, and I don't know why. How about that? Can you hear us now? Hello?
I can.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
hear you.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. I'm sorry.
So what is the nationwide total? I read a few years ago that it was $5 or $6 trillion in unfunded pension liabilities nationwide for state and local public employees. Do you know what the figure is now?
Yeah, well, you'd be right. It's the latest figure is $4.7 trillion. That's with a T. $4.7 trillion nationally, and as you mentioned, I mean, some states are worse than others. Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Ohio, Texas, and California, for example, have really bad unfunded public pension debt. But most states have unfunded debt to some extent, and on average, overall, the states are only about 40% funded.
So what is that, about $14,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country?
Right, yeah. And keep in mind that that's money that should be in the bank today, earning compounded interest over time to make sure that there's enough money in the pot when people retire. And so that money should be in there today, and it isn't. And now, as I mentioned, I mean, politicians have been robbing other accounts and putting that money in the pensions, trying to make this work, but it's not working.
So what's the path to resolve this problem? What are our options? I'm sure you explore them in your book in detail, because obviously there's no point in writing about it unless you have an idea about how we can fix it.
Well, the most important change that needs to be made is for state and local governments to transition over to 401k pensions, because they're much more transparent, they're more affordable, they're always fully funded. There's never an unfunded liability that taxpayers have to make up. And it's also very easy to show that in most cases the employee comes out better than they do under the old-fashioned defined benefit plan, and that's because those plans made more sense when people stayed with the same employer for 30, 40 years, because they're backloaded in terms of the benefits. But let's face it. I mean, most people today don't want to work for the same place for 40 years, like my dad did. They like flexibility. They're just a much more mobile workforce. And the beauty of a 401k is that you own the account. It's your money. It's portable. If you change jobs, the money goes with you. So it's a much more modern way of providing retirement security than the old-fashioned defined benefit plans. But I show in my book, though, that for California, and this would work in other states, though, that if you would transition everybody into a 401k, you'd actually create the savings that you could use to pay down the accumulated debt. So if everybody was transitioned, all the public employees at the state level in California were transitioned to a 401k, the state would save more than $6 billion a year that they could then use to pay down the debt and pay for the benefits that have already been earned, and people are counting on that money being there. So we don't have to go the road of Detroit and actually cut checks and reduce checks for people who have already earned their benefits or are in retirement.
Yeah, the unions fight tooth and nail, as they did in Detroit, claiming it was a constitutional matter that their pensions be preserved at all costs. And I say to them, it's a Pyrrhic victory. What you are guaranteeing for yourselves is 100% of nothing when the thing eventually goes bankrupt.
That's right.
Instead of getting maybe 90% of something if you convert it into a 401k.
That's true, yeah. And after the ruling in Detroit by the federal bankruptcy judge and the ruling in Stockton, California, for the first time ever, in California, a federal bankruptcy judge ruled that a city in bankruptcy can reduce current pension checks. So now we got two court decisions saying the same thing. I think retirees should be very nervous that the money is going to be there when they need it, and that's why if they were to support what I'm recommending in the book, a transition to a 401k for new people, then it would, or for current workers, then it would guarantee that the money is going to be there for current retirees or people just about to retire. So I think it makes a lot of sense for current government retirees to back this proposal that I'm recommending, because that way the cities and counties would save the money they need going forward to pay for the promises already made and the benefits already earned. I mean, these people did the work. That was the agreement when they did the work. They've earned the benefits. They're now retired. So I think they should get that money. I think that's the moral position. But so how do we pay for it? And the best way to do it is to transition to a 401k, because then we'll generate the savings that we need to actually pay for these benefits that have been earned.
Lawrence, is there any? I have one friend in particular who I always think about, who worked for the police. He worked for the FBI. He worked really hard. He worked in a dangerous job. And by the time he was like 45 or 50 years old, he retired on a full pension. He then went and got a security job making more than I make. And he's going to collect that pension for the next however long he lives. Is there any move in California or any other state to try to get the unions to realign these contracts so that maybe they can retire and go get another job, but that they can't collect until they're older? Because, collecting that kind of a pension for 20 or 30 years is killing people. Everybody else, not the
Yeah. Well, there were reforms 3 years ago, 2012, that were passed in California that reduced or kind of eliminated some of the tricks that were used to hike pension benefits. So, for example, pension spiking, it's called, where you would work in unpaid overtime, unpaid vacation that you had on account, and then you'd work that into your final compensation, because final compensation is used to determine your pension benefits. So there was a lot of shenanigans like that where people would save up all their unused vacation and then cash it in at the bitter end, and then that would really spike up their pensions, sometimes to the point where they would actually make a higher pension in retirement than their final salary that they made while they were working. So there was a lot of that, and that's been reined in somewhat. But the problem is that things like that, I mean, you can save a little bit of money like that would save between $75 and $80 billion a year, the things that they passed in 2012. But we're facing a $750 billion unfunded pension debt. So, it helps. It gets you about 10% of the savings, but it doesn't get you where you need to be. And that's the problem with pensions, is that it's really it's like trying to change the direction of a blimp. You turn the wheel, and about 6 miles down the road, it starts to move. And that's kind of with pensions, because whatever changes you made have to work through the system for 20, 30, 40 years until people start retiring. So you really don't see the benefit until way out in terms of the savings. So in order to get really significant structural savings, you got to make an important, significant change to the pension plans, and that's the shift to a 401k. That's the only thing that really generates the savings that you need in order to bring these costs in control, these costs going forward, and also have the money that we need to pay down the debt without cutting, services even more. At least that would kind of hold the line on services too, which, in the blue state is very popular. So, so I think that makes the most sense. And again, part of this will be on a ballot initiative, hopefully in 2016 in California. And the other aspect of this ballot initiative in 2016 that's being proposed is to have voters have the final say for any benefit increases going forward. So politicians can't do what they did in the past. So if they want to increase pension benefits going forward, they need to get the approval of voters. And other regions of the country that have this check on politicians, they've avoided some of the major problems with their pension funds that we've seen in other parts of the country. So I think that would be a really significant reform, is to allow voters to have the final say. It seems only fair, right? They're going to have to pick up the bill eventually, so they should be able to have the final say in what the financial obligations will be.
Yeah, isn't this actually a problem from the micro to the macro level, meaning it happens in the small towns, our local towns, and it happens, of course, at the national level with Social Security? If we don't convert this from a defined benefit into a defined contribution plan, where the money is explicitly vested for the owner, we're going to have this problem writ very, very large indeed.
We actually don't have time for you to answer that. We're running out of time, and I want people to know where they can go to get your book.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, California Dreaming is the title, and it's available on Amazon and also our website, which is independent.org.
Well, thank you so much for taking some of your Saturday morning to talk to us.
We really
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. You have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye. All right. That's this week's show. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to check us out on iTunes, iHeart, Spreaker, TuneIn, Stitcher. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and please visit patreon.com/GrokTALK to support the program. We will see you next week with more news, more conversation, more Grok Talk.
Grok TV.